Hi, welcome. We're here for the dynamic duo, project management and change management, teaming up for excellence. Now, this is an interesting topic because we often talk in terms of project management and, the processes, and then we wonder why we struggle. And really kind of looking at the concepts of change management, when we put those two together, we create this dynamic duo, which really, brings our game up to a much higher level. So as usual today, our hosts, myself, David Donaldson, and we've got on technical support Lauren Connor. If you do have any technical issues, please just pop into the question box and just type in a quick note, and Lauren's going to be monitoring that for us. Also, if you do have any questions during the session, please just type in the question box. We will pause for questions throughout, and again, Lauren will be monitoring that and then giving us a quick heads up. Off to the right of your screen, you should see your control panel. Now at the top, there's a little red arrow there, and if you click on that, it'll slide it, it'll collapse it down, give yourself a little bit more real estate if you need it. If you want to switch to full screen mode, that's that next icon. Just click on that, it'll kind of fill up your screen. And finally, if you have a question or a comment or need some attention, just raise your hand, and again, Lauren's going to be monitoring that for us. Throughout the session, we will be doing some polls and questions, giving you the opportunity to ask questions and interact with us. So when you see this little icon pop up, then it's your turn to interact with us. We will be recording this session, so if you do have any issues or would like to rewatch it, it will be recorded and it will be on our members-only site. So to introduce our guest speaker today, Siobhan's joining us. Welcome, Siobhan.
Hi.
Great to have you on the line today. She is our change management expert, and she's going to help us walk through looking at how we can layer change management on top of project management to create that dynamic duo and really kind of bring it up to the next level. So we're going to start off with a quick poll. I want to ask you, what percentage of initiatives, change initiatives, and really a project is a change initiative, because anytime we're doing a project, we have something different when we're done. What percentage of project initiatives succeed? So Lauren, if you could bring that poll up for us. So the poll is now open, and we'll give you a few moments to respond. So we're just passing 50% responding. You guys are fast today. This is awesome. I love it. 60%, 70%. Give it a few more moments. Okay, we're at 73%, 74, 75. All right, let's see what they have to say. Lauren, if you could show us the results, please. And we see that 57% are saying 30% of initiatives fail. So we either have a very realistic group or a very pessimistic group. I'm not sure which. 36% are saying B, 36% are saying B, 11% are saying C, we've got 2% at 90. So either we have 2% of our population is doing a really great job and a bunch of pessimists, or maybe they're being a little bit more realistic. So Siobhan, I'm going to turn it over to you for a moment.
No problem. The reality is, the real answer here is A. It's 30% of the change initiatives that we have actually succeed. And that might shock some of you. That's such a low number. So what is really going on? So you've got about 70% of change initiatives actually failing in organizations, which is a huge number. We had John Cotter, who's one of the leaders in change management, who did a substantial amount of research in different organizations to find out, how many initiatives actually succeed. And what he found back in 1996, that the number was at around 30% are successful, which means 70% are failing. And that number still hadn't changed even in 2012 when he came out with his latest edition. So you can see that the number is still quite substantial, and there's multiple different factors that come into play as to why these change initiatives aren't succeeding.
Fantastic. That's some scary statistics, and I'm really happy that you're showing that this is not just opinion. This is backed up by some solid research. So we think about that and look at what are some of the obstacles, and the source extracted from ProSci's work in 2009. We've listed out some of the obstacles that we see, and this is consistent within our work with our clients and what we're seeing as well. So ineffective change sponsorship from senior leaders. And I look back at my own personal history and I think about those really successful change initiatives that I've been on. Every single one of them had good, supportive sponsorship from our senior leaders. And when that's there, it really helps us move forward. Resistance to change from employees. It doesn't matter how much the senior management's saying, go in this direction, unless the employees, unless the frontline staff are also picking up the charge and going in that direction as well. We need to have it from both sides. Insufficient change management resources. This is just such a common theme in the world of both project management as well as change management. We're just trying to do more with less and just not having the resources we need. We've talked about the senior management, the employee side, the middle management needs to be there as well. We need to get support in all three of those levels. Poor project management. So we're going to be looking today more focusing on the change management side, which is really kind of the softer side of that, but we also do need to have that procedural thing. So it's really about having the bookends of both project management and change management, having them both there. That ineffective communications always comes up. 80–90% of what you're going to do as a project manager is communicate, and through our session today, Siobhan's going to help us realize that, change management is more than just communicating, and but if we're not effectively communicating, we're not getting our message out there, as well as a cultural resistance to change. And again, from my own experience going into organizations that are very culturally accepting change, you see those changes go much smoother and easier, and then of course, when they're resisting, it's a struggle. So what does change management involve? Now, as having grown up mainly in the project management world, I got a little bit of an idea of what project change management's about. To me, it seems to be it's just about communicating, but I think it goes beyond that. So Siobhan, could you enlighten us, please?
Absolutely. So change management, while many people think it's just about having really great conversations, it does go a little bit deeper than that. So when we're talking about strategic two-way communications is what it needs to leverage as a part of a dynamic process. It's not just the leader telling people, this is the new idea, we must get on board, do as I say. It really involves a dialogue where the staff and the management are dialoguing together, and they're creating what we call a shared vision so that they feel that they are part of the process, part of this change. It's not something that's just being pushed on them. And then the second part is around creating or engaging activities to create an awareness of what the change itself is. So this is done through information sharing, where you may hear some really great facts or figures as to why we actually need to change. And that's where the leader really has an opportunity to inspire people's interests into why this is such a great idea. Why do we need to change, and why do we need to do this right now? It's also an opportunity to help those that have concerns, or there may be challenges as to why they will accept the change, to have those concerns being addressed. And so this is where people truly understand the why, and you can also engage them in determining what might be coming ahead. C talks about ensuring readiness, and this is often missed with most organizations because we're also quick to come up with this great idea and just implement it, that we don't spend enough time making sure that the organization itself is ready for this new initiative that we're about to implement. So part of change management is really working within the organization and determining, are they even ready for the change? And then lastly, it looks at instilling confidence through empowerment activities. So this is where we have the employees participate as part of the change, and that we are aware of what the future desired end state looks like, and leaders are instilling confidence by allowing them to be creative, take some risks, and to provide them with small wins and encouragement along the way to build that momentum.
Fantastic. So I'm just thinking of this in a project management context and perspective. We talk a lot about engagement. And one of the things I really like about this, item A that you've identified here is it really is a two-way thing. So I think too oftentimes engagement, is executed as a very one-way thing. It's like you have to do this, you have to do this, and having that kind of two-way thing. So that's a really good point there. The other one I really liked what you said is around inspiring people and helping them understand the why. Too many times I see project managers, they launch into the project, they're working very hard, they're filling in all the forms, but they're not understanding why are we doing this project.
Absolutely.
And yeah, when you don't have that why, you're I feel you're really adrift because you really don't know your direction, you don't know where you're headed, and especially when we get lower down in the organization to the more frontline staff, they may have a very clear picture in senior management why they're doing it, but have they communicated that down? And as the PMs of the world, do we understand the why, and do we have a clear picture of that? So some really great stuff there.
And it's really the role of the change leader to communicate that why, and they do it in a very compelling way to get people to want to take action.
Which ties right back into our engagement again.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And then finally, the supporting people, both preparing them for the change as well as following through as they transition through that change. So some fantastic stuff here. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the 5 process groups of projects. So initiating, planning, executing, closing, monitor, and control. We'll take a quick look at each one of these. We'll just identify some of the common elements of project management around those, and then layer that with the change management options, items that can help support us in those areas. So we'll start off with initiating. On the PM side, this is really about defining the why. So understanding, why are we doing this project? Should we move ahead? Yes or no? Identify who our stakeholders are, who's going to be impacted, and who do we have to work with, as well as, of course, the business needs. So let's take a look at this from the change management side.
Well, from the change management perspective, at this point, it's really important for the staff to really understand the need. Why are we doing this in the first place? So similar from project management, where you're looking at defining the why are we even engaging in this project and making sure that's aligned with the strategic objectives of the organization. Change management is also needing to understand why are we doing this? What is the sense of urgency that needs to be created? Is the company going to be going under? Do we need to change processes to be able to address the needs of our consumers? Is there some inefficiencies that need to be realigned so that we can make things run in a more efficient and a more effective manner? And for us to do that, we have to create what Cotter refers to as a sense of urgency. It's to propel people to want to take action. But for them to do that, they have to understand why we need to take that action in the first place. And then we take a look at organizational readiness. So really what we're doing here is a needs assessment of what is it that people need? Are they even ready for this change? And if they're not, what do we need to give them to get them to be ready?
Fantastic. I love that sense of urgency and getting people to want the change, right? So we're not forcing them out. They're actually like looking for it and craving it.
Yes, absolutely.
Beautiful.
So when we look at change management, what does it actually mean? There's a couple of strategic approaches and 4 elements that you need to consider. So when you're trying to get people to move and take action, that creating that sense of urgency towards that desired future end state, there's 4 aspects that need to be taken into consideration. So first we've got the context, which is the why. So both project management and change management address this. Why are we doing this in the first place? But then we also got to take a look at, well, what might be some of the potential challenges that we may be facing, which is the what in terms of the barriers. We also have to take a look at the process, which I know from a project standpoint, we do focus a lot on process and implementation, but we also need to look at processes and implementation from the change perspective. So how do we align those structures, the policies and procedures once things have already been implemented so that they actually stick? And then we've got the element of the people. So who needs to be involved in this? Who are being impacted by the change, who's leading the change, who may be supporting the change. So we have to figure out who those people are. And oftentimes what we find when you look at those 4 different elements, when I speak to individuals, they tell me that the people are the wild card factor because we never know. Are they going to be on board with the change with us? Are they going to say that they think this change is a really bad idea? How are they reacting? Because they've got all these wide emotions. So change really takes a look at not just the deliverable itself, but also the people that are involved in ensuring that we've got support mechanisms in place to help lead them through that change successfully.
Fantastic, and I can see now why PMI is looking at, or they've separated stakeholder engagement and managing your stakeholders out into its own whole area. And there's so much more focus around managing your stakeholders these days, and it really makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
So moving into planning, from a project management perspective, this is really where we dig into the details of the what and the how. So we've already kind of identified the why, so what's the product that's going to meet that why or address that problem, need, or opportunity, and then how are we going to deliver it. We're getting down into the details. We're doing things like rolling wave, where we're breaking our project down into phases, And this is where we get really into the nitty-gritty world of balancing our priorities, so our whole cost versus scope versus time. So what can we do on a change management perspective to support some of that?
Well, once you've got the project team together and who are going to be creating this new change, we also need to create what we refer to as a shared vision of what the end state looks like. A shared vision is slightly different than just a desired end state. So the desired end state is what we ideally would like to see as the result of this change. But having it being a shared vision means you're actually involving the team members who will be impacted by the change, those who are involved in the change process itself, so that way you gain the buy-in and commitment. So as part of the planning process, if you involve them right at the front, you also increase the change readiness and you also increase commitment to the change itself. Then we want to select who specifically will be part of the change team, which may or may not be different from your project management team. So your change team, also known as a guiding coalition by Cotter, is really a group of individuals that are very influential that can help the change be building momentum throughout the organization. So strategically, you might want to pick individuals who are highly influential in multiple different areas or different departments, especially if it's an organizational-wide change, because that way they can impact the department and they can come back and report back in terms of what's going on, any issues, any concerns or challenges, and those will be addressed. So the change team is really fantastic for that, and they'll be championing the change throughout the organization. Part of the planning requires you to build momentum, and so that strategically you may be building small little wins along the way so that people see that, you know what, this change is actually happening and it's working, and we can see some milestones that we're meeting. And then lastly, we want to be able to anticipate what are the reactions that people are going to have for the change. So we would do a stakeholder analysis to figure out, well, who needs to know what when, similar to what we do when we're putting together a communications plan, but also anticipating what reactions might these stakeholders have and how, so we'll anticipate what those are, and then we'll have conversations or perhaps deal with strategies to effectively address those areas.
Fantastic. So a couple things that I heard in that really popped for me, especially the shared vision piece and encouraging people to participate and to commit to that change and you know, engaging them early. And we hear this so often, and you know, it really, we need to kind of step out of the whole checkbox, let's fill in the paperwork, and let's, you know, manage those people, which is fantastic. I just want to take a quick little side step here. Who had a really good question come in a little bit earlier that I just want to address is, how do we assess readiness?
Oh, very good question. So when we are looking at assessing readiness, it's from two different levels. You've got one, which is the individual level. Are the individuals of your team, are they ready to take on the change? Because they may be dealing with multiple different challenges themselves, whether they have multiple projects that they're currently working on, different objectives, so they themselves may not be ready. They may be overloaded with too much changes or too much other initiatives. And then you've got the organization readiness. So there are some assessment tools that are available, whether it is through ProSci or even with ADCAR or other, and even if you were to go through our CMP program, we would talk about some assessments too, to determine where does the company lie and are they ready for the change. If they've been going through multiple changes previously and then you hit them with another organization change, or better yet, you want to shift the culture of the organization, that's going to require some time to get people acclimatized as to what's happening. So people need to know, why are we changing, when is this happening, and they might need to know somewhere in between 3 months to 18 months before the changes. The bigger the change, the more time they need to know in order to get them ready. So when you're assessing their readiness, it's more coming from conversations. You can tell through people's engagement scores if they are happy when they're coming to work, if they're totally engaged with the work that they're doing, they're interested, they're committed, they're giving you that discretionary output. That's usually they're ready for the change. If you notice that people are complaining, there's a lot of low morale, people are absent, and then you want to throw in another change, chances are it's not going to be very successful, and you're going to have a lot of additional barriers that you're going to be faced with.
Fantastic. So it sounds like although we do have a number of formal tools to do assessments, even just raising some awareness within ourselves and just kind of paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah, you've got to pay attention to the cues that are going on from your team members and from the organization.
Fantastic. So we're going to move into our next question, which is how do we deal with resistors?
Yes, this is the question that we typically get from most people. They want to know, how am I supposed to deal with those people on my team that just won't fall in line? They're giving me a bunch of problems. Well, the reality is no matter what initiative that you want to implement in your organization, you're going to get some resistors. But what it happens is it kind of falls like a distribution curve. So you will end up initially having some people will support you, some people will be neutral, and then some people are going to be your resistors. So similar to when you were in school and you had that teacher that told you, you know, some of you guys are going to pass my class with A's and some of you are going to just fail. And then most of you will probably fall somewhere in between with a bunch of B's and C's. I never liked that teacher. And it works the same way with change. So when you come up with a new initiative, what happens? You get about 16% are going to jump off the bat are going to be your supporters. And then you've got 68%, that's the bulk, that are in the center that are going to be in the neutral level. And so they're not going to jump on board. They're just sort of waiting and saying, prove to me that this is a very good idea and that I should be there. And then you've got 16% that are going to be a real pain. And they're the ones that are outwardly telling you your idea sucks and they don't want to be part of it. So as a leader, I've got a question for you who are on the line. Where would you spend the bulk of your time communicating with? Would it be the resistors, the neutrals, or your supporters? So I'm going to throw that as a polling question to your folks that are here online. Where should you spend the bulk of your time?
So Lauren, if you want to open that poll for us, thank you so much. We'll give you a few moments to, oh, look at you guys, you're already at 15%, 20%. This is fantastic. So I'll let you guys get up to about 75, 80%, and then we'll share the results. So where would you spend the bulk of your time, resistors, neutral, or supporters? 65%. Give it a few more moments. I love it when we have an engaged group like
I
this.
know.
They just bang on and go, go, go. Love it. Okay, 70%, 71. So we're going to close the poll now. Lauren, if you could bring up the results for us. And we see 18% said resistors, 58% said neutral, and 23% said supporters. Siobhan, what do you think?
Interesting. So for those who said the supporters, I understand that positioning, because generally what happens is you want to be able to help your supporters by giving them all of the tools to help champion the change and get people on board. But the reality is the supporters are already on your side, so you don't have to spend the bulk of your time with them, but I'm not saying don't spend any time with them, because you want to keep them engaged, because they are going to be your champions of the change.
You want to maintain them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You got to keep them engaged, right? Otherwise, you're not going to have a very successful change. Then on the flip side, you've got the resistors. And I know the tendency with resistors is if they're a pain and they're the ones that are squeaking and making all kinds of noise, we tend to focus our attention on the resistors, because they're the ones that are making our lives challenging by telling us why this idea is no good and why it's not going to work.
The old squeaky wheel syndrome.
Exactly. So with the resistors, depending on how influential they are, you will likely spend some of your time with them. If they're a highly influential resistor, you may spend a little bit more time with them trying to uncover what are the challenges, and you would do that so that when you go back to your planning team and back with the project team, you can figure out how can we address some of those challenges, because maybe we might need to build that into the work breakdown structure in terms of additional tasks. Or they may also raise some additional risks, in which case you'll look at doing a risk management plan to come up with mitigation strategies to be able to deal with them. But the reality is you're going to spend the bulk of your time with the neutrals, because the neutrals, there's 68% of them. And once you're able to get about 70% of the organization on board, you will build enough critical mass that the rest of the organization has to fall in line, whether they like it or not, kicking or screaming. So they're going to be pulled. So you want to focus on the biggest bulk, which is your neutrals. And if you're able to even address some of the resistors, or at least neutralize the resistors. You might not get the resistors fully move over from resisting to supporting, especially if they've said publicly that they think this is a bad idea, but you may be able to move a resistor to somewhere in the neutral, and that's still a good position. But the neutrals will see that as long as you're addressing concerns, you're being open and transparent in terms of your communications, and you're explaining the why, they're more apt to move towards to becoming a supporter. So the bulk of your time should really be spent with B, the neutrals.
Interesting. So I guess it's, and when you say critical mass, it's almost like as a resistor, I'm gonna lose some of my steam if I'm only 10-15% of the organization and everyone's on board and kind of moving in that direction.
Yes, and you don't have much of a choice, because if the direction of the organization is moving that way, you kind of have to follow suit, or you will find another avenue that's going to be more aligned with what your values are.
Fantastic. We have a great question from David here. What if the resistors are your authority, i.e. your senior manager level?
Nice.
Yeah,
so you've got a senior manager who is not supportive of the change, but if this is an organizational-wide directive, this one is going to be very challenging. If the senior manager who who you're reporting to is not on board with the change and is actually resisting it, they're going to actually influence and impact the rest of their team by about 26%, because they're going to be able to directly communicate to their team, and they're probably going to share why they think that it's a very bad idea. But the reality is, the change is still going to be moving forward if there is enough people within the organization to get to that critical mass. Now, when this direct manager is not on board with that change, there's a couple of conversations that need to be had. So you have to figure out, well, what's the challenge? What are the issues? Why are they resisting? What's in your control to actually deal with? And then who can we go to answer the questions as to why this is such an issue and remove some of those barriers. So without knowing all of the details, I can totally empathize that this would be a challenging situation, but you would then have to figure out what are the issues and what are the resistant points. So why is it that your senior manager is saying that this is not a good idea or resisting it? And then they go to the next level up to get the information, to figure out why, what's the direction, what do we need to do, how can we accomplish this, what does the plan look like, and more so focus on what's in your control, what can you do. Because if you focus too much on what you can't do, that'll get you in a tizzy, and you'll start spiraling it out into why this is such a bad idea and going more into the resisting side.
Fantastic. And really from a PM perspective, I think this is where our sponsor can really be our best friend, because we can engage their help.
Yes.
Being at those higher levels. Then of course the biggest challenge now is what if that person who's resisting is the sponsor. Fantastic. So we're going to step into executing. From the project management plan perspective, this is where we execute the plan. So this is where the work gets done. As I like to say, plan the work, work the plan. This is where we're going to have those change requests. So we kind of laid out what we're going to do. We're heading down that path. We get the bumps in the road, the change requests come in. So we've actually got little mini changes we have to deal with there, as well as dealing with the issues. And this is often where, from a project manager perspective, we see the resistance starting to manifest. And it may have been relatively quiet before, or maybe we just hadn't seen it, but now it's really coming to the surface. So what can we use around change management tools and techniques to help us with that?
Well, first of all, when we were in the planning stage, we would have been creating some milestones, and we do that already when we're doing our project plan. But we're going to do milestones from a change perspective, where we're looking at recognizing people for their efforts and accomplishments, and we call those short-term wins. So they're very strategic, and it's done so that we can build momentum for the change. And then we want to create excitement so that we have people who are champions of the change saying, wow, this is such a great idea, and all the results that we've realized as a benefit to the change. And by creating that excitement through some of those short-term wins, we start building more commitment and gaining more momentum. And then as leaders, we want to encourage our team members to experiment, try out the new system, try the new change, to adjust their behavior to the desired behavior that we're looking for, and then praise them with recognition or perhaps feedback so that we can encourage them to take a few more risks. So as long as it's not resulting in people dying, then there's nothing wrong with taking a risk. Now, if you're in the medical field and you happen to be online right now listening to this, there are some risks that you can take and there's some that you can't because you're putting lives at stake at that point. But when we talk about encouraging experimentation, it means just try out the change of it, try out the new system, see what works for you, find out where you might need some additional help. And that's where it's really important for leaders to recognize and praise those that are actually attempting to display the desired behaviors so that you encourage others to do the same.
Fantastic. I love those words, excitement, experimentation, because if we can get people excited about it, they're going to be engaged, they're going to be working on it. And just as you're talking about this, I was reflecting back on a project that I did many years ago that was very successful, and one of the key success factors that I'm now realizing is that we had a sandbox environment. So as the new system was coming out and people were going, I don't know about this, I like my old system, I don't want to change, we encouraged them to go into the sandbox. We gave them a safe environment. They could enter in whatever data they want, they could play with it however they wanted, and there was no danger. Right? So we really gave them that safe environment to play, and I think that was really a key factor in our success, so thank you.
So when I was explaining to you about people experimenting, this is when they start going into what we call the neutral zone. So William Bridges came up with the 3 forms of transitions. He calls them endings, neutral zone, and new beginnings. But as part of a change process, there's usually, when the change is initially disclosed, people go through what we call like a shock or denial. Then we have to deal with the endings, which is letting them know we're not going to be continuing doing the same thing that we used to do. And then we move into the neutral zone. So this is where we're going to be engaging people to experiment, try out new things, to be creative, take some risks. And the more that they do that, the more they become accepting of the new process, because now they're ingrained and it's involved into it and they're participating, and that's how we can then move into the new beginnings, which is that desired future end state. So that's sort of how they transition from where they currently are at to that new desired end state after we've implemented the change.
Nice. So we're seeing that kind of initial negative, but helping the team work through that, they'll be able to basically move on from the ending that they're now perceiving as the loss into the acceptance and then the commitment to that new beginning.
Yeah, and so it's really important for leaders to empower that action and generate those opportunities for those wins by building momentum. And as we start moving into the next stage, with the monitoring and controlling, this is where they're going to be looking at monitoring how people are throughout the entire process.
Interesting. And I noticed that on the change management side, it's about monitoring reactions, because on the project management side, we use the terms, monitor and control, which really is watch and fix. And I think we sometimes get too focused on, oh my goodness, we're off budget or we're off our timelines, and we take corrective action around that. Meanwhile, we should be maybe focusing a little bit more on the reactions. So talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so when we're looking at managing reactions, you're dealing with people's how they're reacting to the change. So as we said, some people are going to support, some people are going to resist, and then you've got those who are going to be neutral. And so oftentimes I get asked this question: why is it taking people so much time to move from being a resistor to a supporter? Because we want them to get there faster. And when we're monitoring the reactions, we're seeing that some people are like, hey, that's great, we're all on board, let's move. And then there's a whole bunch of people that are just dragging their feet. So we want to move them, we have this tendency to want to push them fast through that change curve. But we actually have to slow down. We can't push them too fast, because if they do, they'll regress. So we have to pay attention to where they are right now, what's happening for them, and what do we need to give them in terms of supports to help move them through that curve. So the next slide, here's where we look at managing their actual emotions. So as a leader, it's really important for you to pay attention to what's happening with the individuals in your team. So the first stage, as soon as the change is communicated, you've got what we refer to as the anxiety starts coming in and the denial. So people get anxious because they don't know what's going to happen next, or they go through the denial stage of, yeah, whatever, they tried that in the past and it didn't work, so they're not really going to do this anymore. And so you might notice some people dragging their feet because they don't actually believe that the change is going to happen. And then we move over into the next stage, which is the anger. So they get frustrated and they get upset because things are going to be done differently. So sometimes they may take out their hostility on senior management or on their direct leader, and they'll be a bit hostile when it comes to their work, so they might not actually do what it is that you're asking them to do because they're still caught up with there's going to be a change coming and they didn't want this. They would like things to remain status quo. So that's where you start seeing more of that resistance start to show up, and people start feeling like I'm going to be losing something. And in some cases, it really is a loss for them. It's a genuine loss, whether they lose their team members because some people are going to end up leaving the organization. They lose access to specific systems or to resources. And so this is where they start hitting what we refer to like as an ultimate low. And a lot of this theory that I'm discussing here actually came from the Kubler-Ross model, and she took a look at it from death and how people actually deal with it. So she has 5 different phases. So the denial, anger, and bargaining, and then the next one is depression. So this is where people hit the lowest of the low. So they are upset and they're crying and they don't want to deal with this anymore. You'll notice that people at this stage might be feigning ignorance. I didn't know I was supposed to do that. I'm not doing it anymore. And so this is the height of the resistance level. Sometimes even in resistance you might notice that they spike in terms of productivity. So you might think, oh, they're on board, but really what they're doing is trying to prove to you that the old way of doing things was the best way. And so when they realize that's not working for them, then they get really upset, and so they hit down into the depression. And then once they realize, you know what, this is the change is happening, whether they want to accept it or not, then they start moving towards acceptance. So that's where we start to encourage them to just try it out. This is the new behavior. Try the new system. We encourage them. We give them some recognition. We give them some praise. We allow them to be creative. And at this point is where you start noticing productivity starting to increase a bit more. And then it gets to the last stage where they're committed. And that's where they've moved on. It's been integrated into the new system, and that they're moved into the next future stages.
Fantastic. And, you know, I hear this all the time about getting people to move faster. And in my work with horses, because in my private life I train horses, and we have an adage which is pressure creates pressure. And the harder you push them, the harder they push back. So sometimes we have to soften that push in order to create that forward movement, because we kind of reduce some of that resistance. And I know a lot of that sometimes is generated by the culture of the organization.
Yes, if you push somebody too fast from the denial stage, like, what, this is not really going to happen, you're like, no, you need to commit right now. Then, and they seem like they've committed, but they didn't really have an opportunity to go through those different emotions, you'll just notice that they sort of swing back at a later point, and then they start coming at you and asking you a ton of questions, and that's where they're going back through resistance, because they didn't actually have an opportunity to really go through the change curve.
Right, so we got a false sense that they've actually moved forward into commitment when they actually haven't. So they may actually still be in bargaining or depression.
Yes.
And you know, as soon as you kind of take that pressure off and go, okay, we've finished the project and we've rolled it out, we can move on to the next project, then people regress back.
And that's why things don't stick. And that's where we have a problem with sustainability, because you didn't give people enough time to be able to go through those different emotions.
Yeah, and it's fascinating that Kubler-Ross equated this with death, because I know from my readings and research on change management is people often have that association of loss. Even though they may be gaining something, they've kind of lost the old state. So they really need to have a bit of time to process through that. And then I guess how high that emotion is, it's going to really impact how long it's going to take them.
Absolutely. That's why it's really important to be sensitive to people while they're going through those stages and acknowledge that they are going through some true losses. And even if we go from like a personal experience that I've had with my grandfather when I lost him, you know, people asked some really strange questions, like, or said some strange things to me around, like, well, you should have known he was going to pass away because he was 100 years old. Well, yes, I get that, but I don't want to hear that right now. So, you know, I'm dealing with my own grief at that moment. I don't want to be rational or logical. And then people are going to go through the same thing when they're dealing with a loss. They lose access to their system. They've lost their best friend who they used to work with. So telling them, here are all the great benefits as to why we need to accept the change, that's not going to work with them. You have to be sensitive to their emotions and acknowledge, you know what, I'm sorry for your loss. If that was a friend that they ended up who had to leave the organization due to a merger or restructure or a new acquisition.
Or they just got another job and left.
That too, exactly. And then those who are left over have to pick up the slack, so to speak. And, you know, there may be some anger and some frustration in there. And then you also got the depression because they missed their friend.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Some fantastic stuff here. Thank you. So we'll move into the closing phase, and from the project management perspective, this is really about the transition of the deliverable. This is about getting those sign-offs. This is about, I'm going to take this thing that I've been, past year or two building, and then I'm going to transition it to my customer, and they're going to take it over and start to use it and gain benefit, as well as take responsibility for it. And this is also where we do our lessons learned. We reflect back and say, how did we do? Where could we improve? That sort of thing. So what are some of the change management aspects that could help us do these two better?
Well, it's more around aligning systems and structures together, because once you have implemented that change and then you want to walk away and move on to the next great project, what happens is that if you don't have processes, you don't have procedures, policies that are written to maintain that change, people tend to revert back to their old ways. If I was working on one system and now you've implemented a whole new system, but both are still running in parallel, and you say, okay, now we're done and we've moved on and I can still have access to the old one, how long do you think it's going to take before I go back to the old one? Couple of days,
or never go to the first one.
Exactly, or never go to the first one. And so I'm going to revert back to my old ways, even if I hated the old system because I thought it was frustrating, it was slow, it didn't do what I wanted, but it's comfortable. I know it.
The devil we know.
Yes, exactly. Like that old pair of jeans that you had with the holes in it, it's comfortable. I want to go back even though I'm feeling breeze in my knees, but it's comfortable, so I want to go back to that. So that's what people want to do. They want to go back to their comfort zone. So to make sure that they get used to the change, you have to get rid of that old system, and that's how you go about aligning systems and structure. And then the second element of this is integrating it into the culture, which sometimes is even tougher, because if you have a culture that's not apt to change, what will happen is that they'll push you to revert back, and that's referred to as the homeostasis, where you want to go back to your old ways of doing things. So we don't want that to happen. Otherwise, why did we embark on this project in the first place? It was to realize some benefits, and we can't do that unless the whole organization is working with us. So we actually have to integrate this into the overall culture of the organization. So the culture has to accept that this change is coming. They have to be ready for it, which is why we have to do all that stuff at the beginning, which is getting them ready, tell them about the change, explain to them the why, provide them with some supports, be sensitive to how they're feeling, acknowledge their reactions along the way, and address them in a way that is meaningful and supportive so that they can have opportunities to vent, but also show them this is how we can do this in the new world, and I'm here to help you to get that done. So the whole integration into the culture is allowing this new project or new process to look almost seamless. So this is now who we are going forward. There's no turning back at that point.
Right, because I guess we're getting into a bit of the fear of the unknown. We've got that whole, here's my comfort zone, I'm stepping out of that comfort zone. So being supportive of that is, I think, going to be really key. The other thing I'm hearing is that this supportiveness needs to actually really come from the whole organization. So we're almost tying into a bit of the survival instinct that we have around being part of the tribe. So when the whole tribe is moving in that direction, we're going to be much more apt to move with them.
Right.
Right, so getting that whole critical mass that you were talking about. So there's been a couple of comments, questions that have popped in, and I'd like to just bring one of them in right now. And let me just see if I can find it here in the list here. Change management seems to be primarily a psychology role, it seems. So kind of more around addressing, people's emotions and things like that. So let's speak to that for a moment.
So there is some credibility into what that person is saying. It is around psychology. You do need to understand what is going on in the minds of the individuals who are being impacted by that change. And by understanding what's going on, that's how you can help at a cognitive level to connect with them, and then you're moving them towards that behavioral change. But you can't do that unless you take the time to actually understand what's happening for them in terms of that psychology. So yes, for sure, there's a lot to understand in terms of what happens in the minds of the individuals as they're going through change. How are they processing this information? What are the different emotions that they're feeling? And how are you supporting them? Whenever you're introduced to something new, you naturally want to resist because you're used to what's comfortable for you. So if you know that, if now you're introducing a new project, which pretty much every project you have is a change because you're asking somebody to do something different, you're introducing a new program, a new initiative, you're asking somebody to behave in a different way, it's all change. And so they're going to resist. So by understanding that, you can anticipate that, or you can help them get ready to sort of mitigate how much time it's going to take them to shift from the introduction of the idea to the adoption.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Another question's come in, which is I'd like to address. What if the project was launched fast and the new system is not working well, causing people to go back to from moving on to depression? What would you do?
So you notice that they've either slid back or that they seem somewhat committed, but because it's not working the way that they want to, they're just foregoing using this altogether.
Yeah, so it sounds like the new system's in place, it's starting to fail and cause problems, and now where we did have people moving on, they're sliding back.
Yes, so what we're going to have to do is you're going to pull them back together. So we have to address this, and I always encourage leaders to be open and transparent. So if as we're almost at the commitment place where, yes, we've got this new system implemented, but it's not working. So it's frustrating your users and their stakeholders. So now they're sliding back into depression saying, I've spent all this time going through training, learning this new product, but it's not doing what it is I needed to do. The best thing for you to do is to be honest about that. So explain to people, you know what, this was the plan, and we've noticed that it hasn't been working the way that we wanted it to, but this is how we're going to deal with this now. So have an open forum, let people express what are their challenges. So at least that way they vented it. Once they get it out of their system, then you can work through a plan of how are we going to fix this, or what's going to be the workaround, or how are we going to make this work in the new system. If you still have two systems running in parallel, the old and the new, people are going to go back to the old, especially when the new is not working the way that it's supposed to. So you've basically killed any adoption of the new by keeping the old system available. If you kill the old system or no longer allow people access to the old system, whether you just have it running in the background just to keep the information or for security purposes, you want to make sure that people are still moving towards the new, even with some of the glitches. A lot of organizations will launch products that aren't exactly the best of products. Anybody ever got a new cell phone? You know that if you got it very early stages, there's always glitches with this operating system.
Like the beta versions.
Yeah, exactly. So something goes a little bit wrong, you'll complain about it, and then they'll do like a system patch update, and then they get things working a little bit better later on. But it's all about early adoption. So how can we get those people to get on it first to market? So similarly, when you're in an organization and you came up with a great idea, you've implemented, but there's some holes, there's some things that need some tweaking, be honest with everybody and say, okay, you know what, we recognize that there's some issues here, and we'd like to work together as a team to fix that. So let's talk about what are some of the challenges, what are some of the issues that you're encountering right now, and we'll have a team put together to address those issues. In the meantime, we have support for you. We're still working towards a new system. This is still the desired future end state. This is still the vision. This is what we all agree that what we want, and this is why we still need to do this. So you have to go back and reinforcing what is the vision, why were we doing it in the first place, making sure that people still understand what the big picture was, and while we may have had some hiccups along the way, we are still going to get there. It just may take us a little while longer, but we need everybody's help. So that way it's involvement and participation from everyone, and it's not just you telling people, you know, so sad, too bad, follow suit and move on.
Yeah. So, you know, what I'm hearing is we need to show some empathy. We need
Absolutely.
we need to acknowledge that the issues are there. And as you were talking, I was just reflecting back on one of my favorite failure stories, because we all have our success stories.
That's
we
right.
also have our failure stories. And the PM on that, I was dealing with the technical side piece of a larger project, and the PM leading the larger project absolutely refused to acknowledge any of the issues that we were facing. She was like, no problem, we're fine, and just, you know, like it was full steam ahead, let's go, and she was just completely, whether she was blind to them or just didn't want to admit them or acknowledge them, but boy, it really put a damper on the project and made it hard for us to kind of get on board, and it's my project from hell. Sorry. Okay. One other question that popped in while we were talking was, what do we do when the resistor is director, although the CEO vision supports the change, but the director level is saying no?
So you've got the CEO who's technically running the show, has one direction, and then you've got is it board of directors?
No, director.
Oh, the director.
A director.
A director is not falling in line.
Yeah, so they're a resistor.
They're resisting. Well, that director needs to be reminded of what the organization's direction is. So what is it that the organization stands for? Why is the CEO stating that this is the change in the first place? The director would have issues if they see challenges that aren't being addressed. So the only way that that can be satisfied is if that director has an opportunity to speak with the CEO. So the CEO themselves will probably have to have a conversation with the director to reinvigorate or empower them to say why this is such a good idea, what are the benefits, what are the challenges, and address those challenges. So while that director may have some very valid points, because there might be some challenges that the CEO just didn't see, that isn't enough for them to say we're not doing this altogether. So everybody will have some points where you're working on a project that you might not think is the best idea. And I'm sure many of you who are on this webinar right now have been leading projects that you thought may have been a bad idea, but still had to do it because it was part of your role. And what did you do if you were in that situation? Somebody may have said nothing and just fell in line and just did what you were supposed to be you were told, and others of you may have raised it as a question. And what I would encourage all of you to do, and that director if they're resisting, is to get more answers. Ask questions to get answers. When they speak to their team members, it's not to tell the team members that this is a bad idea, but rather to say, this is the change, this is the directive that we've been given, what are some of your concerns and challenges? You know what, I agree with those challenges and concerns too. But focus on what is in our control. So let's come up with a plan for that. And the stuff that we don't have control over or we don't have the answers for, you're empowered to get the answers for them. So I would encourage that director to go back to the CEO to have those conversations. Now to manage, if you happen to be reporting to that director who's resistant, you think it's a good idea, you might want to take the director out for not take them out, like, you know, not a James Bond movie here. Like, you would want to take them out for coffee or something and find out what might some of those issues be, and then bring it back to the project team and the change team to say, look, here's some additional challenges or issues that we may have, so how can we address them? And then let everybody know in an open forum what the results are, and that should help build some more momentum towards the change and quell the concerns of that director.
Nice. So really we're right back to the empathize, acknowledging, and addressing those issues. Yeah. Absolutely. And I found in my experience a lot of time the resistors are actually supporters. They just don't think that this is necessarily the right way. So we can address those concerns and adjust the direction while still meeting the need can be a great way of helping deal with them. So we're just going to kind of wrap up here as we are getting close to the end of our time. And I do have one other question that I'm holding right to the very end from Naomi, so thank you so much for that. It's a beautiful question. Just want to kind of place these three thoughts in your mind as we finish up. Support your individuals. We were talking about empathy and acknowledging what's going on, and that they do have basically a flow or a process to go through, that change curve. And you know, so we need to support them through that. We also look at how to be sustainable on projects. Although the project ends and we do our sign-offs, we do our lessons learned, we move to the next project, unless the result of that project is sustained within the organization, we're losing that benefit, and hence we're losing the benefit. So, and then finally, coupling project management, change management together is really what's going to help us get to that level of success. Now, Naomi, thank you for your patience. She had actually posted two very good questions. They kind of built on each other.
Okay.
The first one was really around, what if the objective comes down from the top? You know, she's kind of saying basically you will have resistance. And as a sort of secondary to that or backup to that, it's, you know, just the sheer words of change management tends to invoke that feeling of resistance. So what can we do to kind of help, you know, deal with that better? Because it seems pretty inevitable that, you know, we're doing a change, there's resistance. What can we do?
So whether you call it a change or not, you know, a rose by any other name is still a rose. So if you don't want to call it a change initiative or change management, fine, don't use that terminology. It's still a change, needless to say. So when the directive comes from the top down of this is something that we want that needs to be done, you're going to be met with resistors, you're going to be met with people who are neutral, and then you're going to be met with those who are supporters. So your best strategy is to determine quickly who your supporters are, establish your team, whether whether that's your project team, your guiding coalition, your change team, whatever you want to call it, those are the teams that are going to be working with you to make sure that that project is going to be implemented successfully. And then you're going to work with them and the rest of the organization to build that vision towards the end result. What is it that we all want to see? What do we want to do that's going to impact not only the organization but the community as a whole? So once they're bought into that vision, or most of them at least have seen what the end state's going to look like, you're still going to have resistors along the way. It's now being able to individually address what are some of your concerns and acknowledge people's reactions. You're never going to get 100% of people on board, and even after the change has been implemented successfully, you will still have people in the organization that think it's a bad idea, and they're going to just go kicking and screaming, and it is what it is. So you have to accept that you're not going to get 100% buy-in all the time. But if you can get about 70% of the individuals to buy in, you've done a very good job, and that puts you in that 30% that are successful versus the 70% that are failures when it comes to your initiatives.
Right. So when we talk in terms of resistors and supporters, it's not about 100%. It's not about getting everyone there. It's about getting the critical mass, getting enough there so that we can sustain it moving forward and have that benefit. Okay. One other quick question just popped in while you were talking around the CMP certification, and are corporations really embracing it, much like the way they've embraced the PMP?
I'm seeing a lot more momentum as it comes to the change management practitioner designation. So many years back, it was all about the project manager, get your PMP, and be, now you know exactly how you should be planning for your projects and implementing them successfully. But then what they started to do with project managers is dump on them, not only do you need to implement this, but you need to manage the change, you need to manage the communications. And so they've expanded the role of the project manager so thin that it's difficult for them to do all of that and get the actual deliverable done. So I've seen some larger organizations having two dual roles. So you've got a change manager and a project manager, and then they both work together.
A dynamic duo.
Exactly. And those are the organizations that recognize that it takes more than one person to be able to implement a change successfully in an organization. So if you're a project manager that also wants to be a change manager and you have double sort of designations, fantastic, because that way you can realize when you're putting together your project plans all of the tasks and activities that you need to have to achieve the deliverable, but also what needs to happen on the back end in terms of getting people ready for their change and making sure that that's being addressed throughout the entire project implementation or the execution. And by doing that, you'll also be able to recruit other resources to help you. So as in terms of the certification goes, I do see that it is starting to get more recognized, and I've noticed that there's more of a demand of people inquiring, how can I get my designation? This seems really good, and they notice that change isn't going anywhere. It keeps we change and change and we keep changing, and so as we keep moving towards this culture as a country or even as a continent of change, we are going to see that the CMP designation is going to become more in demand because people need those in the organization that are apt to know how to handle individuals, how to handle the team when they're going through change, how to help the organization navigate through all of the different interconnections of change. And so that would be one that if you don't have already is something that you might want to consider.
And the CMP is fairly new. Like PMP has been around for a lot of years. So
Absolutely.
It's had a lot more years to mature and to gain that acceptance. We are at 1 o'clock, but we do have 2 additional questions. So if anyone does need to sign off now, I want to just thank you for spending the time today. And again, this is being recorded, so if you do have to sign off, you want to catch the last little bit, you can pick it up on the recorded side. The first question is piloting the change. So if we've got a new initiative coming out, we've got a new system coming out, kind of piloting with a small group and choosing the users. And if you don't mind, Siobhan, I'll address that because I've actually got some experience doing that. I found a lot of success in doing that, and one of the things I really see is that it gives people a chance to be hands-on, to see and feel and touch the tactical level that gets them to do that. And also keep in mind, of course, the pilot phase is a input phase, so we can use that to identify some of the issues and concerns, and we're now really engaging that group of people to help out. And you want to make sure you get a good cross-section of the population around that. So Siobhan, you've got some thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I find that the pilot participants, after they've completed it, they make for great champions for the change. It's because they're the ones that went through it the first time around. So once they're done, they will be the ones that will go to the organization and tell them how great it was, so because they're the early adopters.
Beautiful, thank you. I'm just going to, there's two more questions, and I'm going to grab the second one first, which is, should projects have both project manager and change manager? How would that work from a governance perspective? Very tactical question, Peter, but a really good one. Much like the project management methodology, you want to scale it up and down to what makes sense. So if we're dealing with a smaller project, you could probably have one person, assuming you've got a skilled resource that can cover both. Dealing with that, you get into larger projects, it totally makes sense to have two. Siobhan, thoughts?
I would totally agree with you, David. If for those large projects, having two designated, a project manager and a change manager would be ideal, because then the change manager can deal with all of the stakeholder communications, they can deal with the engagement, and the project manager can work with the team in terms of the deliverables, and then they're both going to work together to make that change successful.
Beautiful.
In terms of governments, you've got the PMO office that for some larger scaled projects and organizations, and then now they're starting to come up with a change management office. So they'll tend to work in tandem when it comes to the projects. Again, it depends on the size of your organization and the structure and how it's built.
Absolutely. I think there's a secondary benefit there too as well. You get a bit of a second set of eyes, the view from the balcony. So as the PM, I might be too down in the weeds to really notice something, and my change manager could help me with that, and vice versa. Great. Okay, so our last question, is there a rule of thumb based on the research in the speed of change implementation? How soon is too soon and how long is too long, from Jennifer? So great question. Siobhan, what do you think?
How soon is too soon and how long is too long?
Yeah, so is there a rule of thumb from the research?
From the research right now, I would say I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. All I know is that you do need to have a good, to get people ready, somewhere between the 3 to 18 months. And if you go faster than that, and the organization isn't ready, you're looking for a problem, and it's going to be quite challenging. So what we see in many organizations is they've got one change, and then within 2 to 3 months later there's another change, and then another one rolls in, and then you've got people dealing with change fatigue because there hasn't been enough of a gap for people to be able to deal with one change to the other. But then it depends on the magnitude of the change. So if you've got small changes, people can probably deal with that in a little bit quicker than if you've got large organizational-wide changes. If you're doing that on a very regular basis, meaning only like 2 or 3 months in between, you're going to get people who are going to be burnt out. So you might need to have somewhere between the 6 months mark to 18 months if it's a massive organizational-wide change.
Interesting. And I guess also the change culture is going to feed into that.
Yeah.
I know I've been in some organizations where they thrive on change, and others who are like, oh, no, we want to be just, how we are. And, back to that whole awareness piece, and are people ready for it, and those sorts of things. All right, so that's all of our questions. I think we got them all. Thank you guys so much. Our contact emails are here, both mine and Siobhan's. If you want to drop us a line, say hi, ask any further questions. Again, this session is recorded, and we will be making it online. So Siobhan, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me, David.
My pleasure, and thank you all out there for taking the time, and we'll see you on our next session.